Could you speak on whether what is happening now in the Middle East might be a prelude leading into the 6th Trumpet War?
So Kathleen from New Hampshire asks really a good question. And what I would point her to would be either my series on the book of Revelation, which is a verse-by-verse exposition of the whole book, actually 72 hours of preaching, or you might listen more recently to a series I did called God's Prophetic Schedule. So if you understand the big picture, which I think would be very, very helpful to you, you wouldn't ask this question because you see the trumpet judgments don't happen until after the church is raptured. And so when you read Matthew 24, for instance, which is the Olivet Discourse, when Jesus has already stated that not one stone would be left upon another, and they're asking, well, when is this going to happen, and what will be the sign of your coming? And so beginning in Matthew 24, verses 4 through 14, he unfolds what we call the birth pangs. And by the way, and I document this in the series, it's not by accident that Matthew 24, 4 through 14 perfectly parallels the seal judgments. And so the deception of the guy on the white horse parallels the false Christ and the false prophets. And each aspect of those verses is a perfect parallel. And then when you come to verse 15, therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, we know both from the Revelation and from the Daniel 9 70th week prophecy that right in the middle of this 7-year period, this event called the abomination of desolation takes place. Daniel wrote about it. And the Antichrist will go into a rebuilt temple, and he'll call himself the living God. And he'll also have an act of idolatry there where a statue is given the ability to speak. And when that happens, Jesus said, look out. And so it's interesting. Again, when you parallel it with the Revelation, it says in Revelation chapter 8 and verse 1, when the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for half an hour. It's almost like people's breath is taken away, total silence. People are pondering why, because unlike with the seal judgments, where when a seal is broken, you can only see one seal at a time. In the seventh seal are contained 8 trumpets, and in the 8th trumpet are contained 8 bowls. And so when the final seal is broken, you can see all the trumpet judgments and all the bowl judgments that will follow. And that's the second half of the Olivet Discourse. And they're so brutal. Jesus, when he begins to describe this time, he says, unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. And so he's just reminding them of how severe this time will be. The first half is a time of tribulation, but it goes from tribulation to great tribulation that's untold. So when you ask the question here about this trumpet judgment, that doesn't even happen until the second half of the tribulation. Can't happen until the 5 trumpets before it are blown. And that can't happen until the 7 seals before that are unfolded. So it's all in the future. What we're seeing now really doesn't have anything to do with the trumpet judgments. Does it have significance prophetically, which is an often asked question people have posited to me in the last couple of weeks, or the last 10 or 12 days, I should say. And the answer is yes, in the sense that God teaches that at the end of time, he would gather Israel back in the land. He would make them a nation. And again, he did that in May of 1948. At that time, there was only 600,000 Jews, and most of those came in just a few years prior to that, largely due to Hitler's hateful death wish on the Jewish people. Some fled to Israel, and so by May of 47, they wanted to establish a nation, and then finally it happens on May the 14th, 1948, and they went from 600,000 Jews to 7.3 million Jews, and people debate on the exact number of Jews in the world today, but at the minimum, there's about 12.5 million, at the max 15 million. So we're talking about a small piece of land the size of New Jersey, a small, minuscule group of people compared to 8 billion people now on the planet, and yet they are the world's focus this morning. Why? Because God is going to use the Jewish people to culminate human history. It's not by accident. This is all part of God's prophetic schedule. And what I do find interesting is that Iran, of course, is threatening the Jewish people if they attack Gaza. Russians are threatening the United States that they'll go against Israel if they in turn respond to Iran. And of course, the three big players during the War of Gog, the Prince Gog and the war in Magog, are basically Russia, Iran, and Persia. Those are the three largest of the 5 nations that are specifically mentioned in Ezekiel 38, which I have a whole message on in God's prophetic series. And the fact that these nations that 20 years ago hated each other, didn't even communicate with each other, but now you find pictures where they link arms with one another. It's not by accident. So the stage is being set. We would be foolish to say that this is it. This means that the rapture is right around the corner. We know we're in the season because Israel has to be back in the land. And when you look at a number of signs all being fulfilled at the same time, it's not by accident that the season is fast approaching for Jesus' return. So it's a good question. I hope that's helpful to you. But Kathleen, I would direct you to listen to the whole series, God's Prophetic Schedule. I think that will give you a clear picture of the large schematic, and it will solve some of these questions you're asking.
Dr. Carl Broggi answers your questions about the Bible and living the Christian life Tuesday mornings at 11 on The Light, 88.7 FM, and online around the world at wagp.net.